It's time to certify, develop, connect, and advocate. So let's talk small business with the Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council and your host, Stacy Key.
Hi, this is Stacy Key, your host for Let's Talk Small Business. I'd like to welcome you to the show. This edition of Let's Talk Small Business, we're going to be focused on the upcoming financial summit on February the 18th. I've got two guests with me today, Dara Butler of the Federal Reserve and Alonzo Lawrence of Gordon & Reese. They're both going to be sharing with me what's going to be happening at the financial summit. We're going to talk about the event and talk about why you need to be in the seat on February 18th. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back to talk with Alonzo and Dara about the upcoming financial summit.
Marching band, play my song, and every choir sing along. Then maybe we can change the world.
Let's Talk Small Business is sponsored by Wells Fargo, the Coca-Cola Company, and Georgia Power, a Southern company.
There are so many numbers in our lives. Numbers we try to make bigger. Numbers we try to keep small. Some we celebrate. Some we work toward. At Wells Fargo, we're here, empowering communities, offering wealth-building tools, and helping you make the most of your numbers, while making sure you never feel like one. Wells Fargo and you, together we'll go far.
We're back, and we're with Dara and with Alonzo to talk about the upcoming financial summit on February 18th. And so Dara and Alonzo, you were both involved with the summit last year, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
So this is our second edition, and the Federal Reserve has been so gracious to host again this year. Dara, thank you so much for making that happen.
You're certainly welcome.
Now, if you've not been to the Federal Reserve, it is an incredible facility. And it's someplace that you can actually live as opposed to working. So, Dara, I've been trying to move into the Federal Reserve for a couple of years now. You've been holding me off.
I know. We're trying to make some space for you, Stacy.
Okay, I appreciate that. And so, Dara, since you've been at the Federal Reserve, you've done an incredible job in helping small businesses, minority businesses, really understand the Federal Reserve, the opportunities. And you've got an extensive background in this area. Could you take a minute and just share a little bit about your background and the history? Because you're pretty impressive.
Certainly. Well, Stacy, I've been involved in the supply diversity arena for almost 25 years.
You must have been a baby, I know that.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in 1990, I was formerly the program administrator for The Ohio State University, and was from that point on involved in supply diversity. I went from there to Macy's as the initial incumbent to set up their program. I am also a former council president, an MSDC council president, as well as a WeBank executive director.
Oh my, you've earned your wings.
Yes, and I also operated as a business management consultant specializing in supply diversity program administration for 13 years. So now I'm at the Federal Reserve to build infrastructure and to help provide access and opportunity to diverse businesses who want to do business with the Federal Reserve.
Well, thank you for all you do. And Alonzo, you've got an impressive background as well. You have done it all. You are a deal maker extraordinaire. Take a few minutes and talk about your background as well.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me thank you again for having me here. I really appreciate it. I'm a partner with the law firm of Gordon & Reese, as you mentioned, which is a national law firm, roughly 750 lawyers based out of San Francisco. I practice corporate law, as you mentioned, do primarily transactions, mergers and acquisitions, initial public offerings, venture capital transactions, and the like. Before I moved into private practice, though, I think the key thing that influenced where I am today in terms of my emphasis with respect to minority businesses is that I spent roughly 8 years with the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington. And I was in the Division of Corporate Finance, which is the transactional arm of the SEC.
Oh, wow.
All of the initial public offerings that go through. And there was one thing that struck me while I was there, which is that there were very few minority-owned companies that were actually going public. In fact, during the time I was there, I think there was only one major company, as far as I know, and that was BET. We know the rest of that. So I made a vow to myself that when I got out of the SEC and entered private practice, I would focus on minority companies.
Well, thank you for all you do. We need you, absolutely. And so as we talk about, the financial summit, access to capital tends to be the number one inhibitor or challenge for small businesses. It just continues to be that. And so February 18th is designed to provide education, to provide resources, knowledge. And so you've written a book about this, Alonzo. So take a few minutes and talk about the book, why you decided it was needed. Let's talk about that up front.
No, absolutely. The name of the book is The MBE's Guide to Raising Capital. And the emphasis behind it and the purpose behind the book really is twofold. One is to overcome some sort of the misconceptions that are out there about raising capital. And the other is to encourage minority-owned businesses to think about it, to be transformative in their thinking. What I've found is that there are a couple of issues that prevent us. First is this: the access to capital is an issue, a hurdle that many of us have to overcome as a general matter. But there are also some ancillary issues, such as cultural issues, reluctance to take on additional risks, things of that nature. So what I wanted to do in the book was lay out a blueprint that set forth the financing life cycle from beginning to end, and it would hopefully demystify how the process worked, but show that there is a method to the madness and encourage minority-owned businesses to pursue it from this perspective.
Excellent. And so everybody that attends the Financial Summit on February 18th will actually get a signed copy of your book, actually. And so for everybody listening, can you tell them how they can get the book? How do they get the book?
Absolutely. You can either go to my website, alonzolorens.com. I'm from Louisiana, so that's a funny spelling, ALONZOLLORENS.com. Or you can go straight to Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Either one of those will work.
Okay. So we'll be right back, and we're going to jump into the details of the Financial Summit, February 18th at the Federal Reserve. So stay tuned. We'll be back.
Here's another reason to love a sunny day. More renewable energy. That's because Georgia Power is helping grow solar energy, making Georgia a national leader. And when the clouds roll in, our diverse fuel mix of nuclear, coal, natural gas, and hydro allows us to choose the most cost-efficient energy source available, saving money for our customers and keeping power flowing 24/7. Learn more about the bright future of energy at georgiapower.com/solar.
So we're back with Dara Butler of the Federal Reserve and Alonzo Lawrence of Gordon & Reese. And so, as we mentioned, on February 18th here in Atlanta, we're going to be hosting the second annual Financial Summit hosted by the Federal Reserve. And Dara, I just want to give kudos to the Federal Reserve because this was actually a brainchild of the Federal Reserve back in 2015 actually. And so talk a little bit about, because you deal with small businesses, minority businesses, women, and why this was important to engage the community in doing something around access to capital.
Okay, I'll be glad to share that with you, Stacey. The Federal Reserve is very, very much involved in making sure that, as a part of our central mission, that we promote sustainable economic growth, and that there's a sound financial system in place. And one of the things that's very important to us is financial literacy. And one of the objectives that we always have in mind with regard to supply diversity is making sure that we do technical assistance that will help the minority business community.
Educational outreach piece of that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so we know that in today's marketplace, the primary role of small business owners is to pull together various resources necessary to achieve goals, and that there are many obstacles that they will encounter on that road with regard to building sustainable enterprise. And probably the most daunting is the necessary capital to start their business and to maintain their business. So we thought it was very important to put something in place that would address that.
Yeah, and we can let's continue the discussion about this because Alonzo, as well, there's been a lot of numbers talking about minorities and women just have a lot of trouble getting the access to the capital, and that they're using the bootstrap method of financing their business, friends and family, more friends than family, and looking for these non-traditional sources of capital and trying to fund these businesses. They're struggling. And what's the backbone? And I know in your book, you're talking about and addressing some of that.
Part of it, I think, is the lack of interest in terms of, I shouldn't say lack of interest, I say more so the ability to figure out where they fit within the process. That is, where do I start? Who are the sources? and what does it take to really overcome the issues that have harmed other minority-owned companies when it comes to accessing capital. So the starting point is really the educational piece, which is why I commend the Federal Reserve for taking this approach and attempting to educate on this particular issue. It's a vital component to the whole process. Mm-hmm. The second thing is accessing those that are in position to finance the company, and that depends upon what stage the company's business is in. Is it an early stage and so forth?
And you know, you bring up a good point. 2 points there. People understanding where do I go, because I have traditional banking, and most people just know the banking is an option, and banking is a great option for sources of capital, but they don't understand the other options that are available to them. And then depending on where your business and the stage of your business can determine what capital makes sense for you, and understanding that piece of it as well. And I think your book addresses the stages and where that capital fits in, which is very critical. If you're not going to make the summit, you absolutely want to go and make sure you get the book, because it's really going to give you some insights in, based on the stage of your business, what other sources of capital that make sense for you, because you've got to make that decision with that.
Absolutely, that's a great point, Stacy. And all of those factors have a part in terms of how you go through the decision-making process and what approach you should take from that point forward. For example, some people say it's an either or proposition. That is, either you go towards for debt or you go for equity.
Correct.
My position on that is that they all have a place. It's just a function of timing and a position of your company, going back to the stage of development. So I'm encouraging people to not only think about debt, because it is a critical component of the financing piece of the equation. Mm-hmm. However, we have to start thinking about equity as well, because it is an equally important piece of the equation as far as the long-term success of your company.
And so when you talk about equity, because I think when I think of small businesses, equity, they tend to shy away from equity, because as a small business, I want to own my business. I don't want anybody else owning my business. And so let's have some discussion around the equity piece, because I don't see many businesses looking to have others invest in the business. They want to own it. I want to own all of it. I don't mind taking on some debt, but I really don't want to give up any equity in my business. And help me understand that culture, that mentality. And I think of minority businesses specifically, they truly don't want to give up any ownership in the business.
Great point. And what I've found over the years is that it relates to a couple of things. First is there is a reluctance to give up what they perceive to be, that is, a minority business is perceived to be as control, which is not a necessary requisite in order to bring in the equity capital. Two is just the unknowns associated with what comes with bringing in equity capital.
So it's back to the education piece.
Back to the educational piece. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, I work with a team in Trinidad. We were brought down there to help them determine what was the best process to move them forward as far as their equity markets are concerned, including starting an angel investment structure and a venture capital structure. But what we found was there was a cultural imbalance in terms of what they perceived as an appropriate level of risk and what was an appropriate way to move forward. So the bulk of the companies down there moved forward on the debt side and were reluctant to take the equity approach. We want to make sure that everyone understands that these are both equal components and have to be factored into the whole financing process.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing now, Dara, as you deal with companies at the Federal Reserve, are you seeing any? And I suspect you're not, but people with this debt and equity, because you're looking at financials, because as you're making decisions on who you're going to partner with in your supply chain, are you seeing companies that have the debt components or debt or equity, or are you seeing any of that? Because I think we're not from a GMSDC perspective.
Absolutely. And I also want to point out that at the Federal Reserve, one of the things that we do with regard to sourcing our diverse business, this is across the board, is that we use Dun & Bradstreet.
You know what? That's a very, very key point, because the credit piece of it plays. Talk about how do you use Dun & Bradstreet? Because people need to really understand how critical the business credit component side of this is.
Well, one of the factors that is utilized with regard to identifying and sourcing vendors is whether or not they have financial stability within their organization. And so the Federal Reserve does look at that and take that in consideration when it's making a decision as to whether or not even a vendor will be invited to bid. So that's our first point of reference, is Dun & Bradstreet. And if there's anything within that profile that sends up a red flag, then unfortunately that vendor will not be included in the bid invitation.
So having a flag in your Dun & Bradstreet can stop the show from an opportunity.
Well, it can certainly raise concern, not to say it will automatically stop, but it will provide, it's a pause and provides the Federal Reserve an opportunity to question any issues or unforeseen situations that they need to be aware of so that they can make an informative decision as they go forward.
And so I know as part of the summit, we've got Dun & Bradstreet as one of our partners, so they'll be there. So understanding what's in your profile is key. Understanding if there's some things there that could send up a red flag, how do you manage them? How do you mitigate the risk there so that any potential company that wants to do business with you does not perceive that as taking on risk?
Absolutely. And I want to take time to thank Alonzo for bringing this book to the forum. We had an outstanding forum last year, and the Small Business Alliance representatives that were there were very supportive and brought a lot of good information and resources with them, but a lot of them are mainstream. So I want to thank you and commend you for taking time to put something together that would actually address the educational needs that are key to minority business being successful from a financial standpoint. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about the actual agenda for the Financial Summit, because I think we've got a power-packed agenda that is going to have something for everyone, very robust. So just stay tuned, and we'll be right back. So we're back talking about Financial Summit 2016 at the Federal Reserve on February 18th. And so I'm going to talk first, let's talk about the agenda for the Federal Reserve, because I think we've got a power-packed agenda for the day. And so we're going to we start at 8 a.m., 8 to 2, and we start with breakfast. We've got Cassius Butts from the Small Business Administration kicking us off. We've got US PAC, we've got the Hispanic Chamber, we've got the DeKalb Chamber, we've got the Greater Women's Business Council, we've got the Atlanta Business League, and obviously we have the Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council, GMSDC, at the table, along with ACE. Grace has done a fantastic job in terms of bringing resources to the table for women and capital. So we've got a power-packed agenda. We've also got Sante Bradford from the Georgia Department of Economic Development on deck to be there with us. And we've got Terry Dennison, as well as from the Georgia District Director for the SBA. She's going to be moderating the panel. And then I think, Dara, one key person I think that's going to be awesome, you've got Dennis Lockhart, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve. He's going to be our luncheon keynote speaker. Now, I've heard Mr. Lockhart speak before. He is awesome. And so that truly speaks to the commitment of the Federal Reserve, having him there to be our luncheon speaker. Yes. But as I'm looking at the agenda, I see we got something for everybody. We've got traditional banking sources, non-traditional sources of capital. Alonzo, you're moderating the non-traditional sources of capital. Mm-hmm. We've got Dun & Bradstreet to talk about the credit piece of it. We've got opportunities for people to have one-on-one sessions to talk about their credit, to talk about angel investing, to talk about venture capital. We've got it all. The Federal Reserve is going to talk about the state of the economy so that we know where we are right now and kind of where we're trending. Whenever you're in an election year, things are typically wonderful, and then you can clearly fall off the range shortly thereafter. But so I think the agenda is power-packed. We've got something for everybody. Everybody should walk away with what they need in terms of access to capital. But could you take a few minutes and talk about the objectives around the session and what we want to accomplish? Because I want to make sure everybody understands what the objectives are for the session. And then I'm going to follow up with you, Alonzo, and talk about is there anything do you think is missing that we need to make sure gets added to this agenda to make sure every small business that shows up here walks away with what they need to get the access to the information or the capital to grow their business to the next level. So, Dara?
Sure. The summit goals for this year's program revolve around building financial acumen around the diverse suppliers that will be attending, with emphasis on information, documentation, and practical application. And specifically, what we want to do is we want to increase the overall financial literacy of the small business owners that will be there. We want to expose them to a full spectrum of capital sources that will be provided by some of the representatives that you mentioned earlier, Stacy. We want to educate the owners with regard to the documentation that lenders require, and we want to enhance fiscal capacity, cash flow management, and sustainability. In addition, we want to provide consultation resources for access to capital, and we want to supply business owners with relevant takeaways and literature to include the wonderful book we're going to receive as a courtesy from Alonzo. So we hope that we are going to not only meet those goals, but surpass them. And again, we're so happy to host this event again. And I don't think you mentioned, but we are planning on doing this on an annual basis at the Federal Reserve.
Oh my, we've got a commitment for the Federal Reserve. We have it on record now. Wow, I'm excited. And so a couple more things. So I'm going to talk about some of our, before Alonzo talks about the agenda, we've got some of our banking partners that will be there: Wells Fargo, BB&T, Fifth Third, Iberian Bank. We've also got Now. Again, we've got Ace, and we've got Bernard Coleman from the Coleman Law Firm LLC, who's going to be talking about angel investing. Additionally, we've got again Dun & Bradstreet. We've got Rodney Sampson, who's going to be joining us, and Rodney's always a treat. He is a wealth of knowledge around the angel investing space. And then again, our community partners: the Georgia Department of Economic Development, DeKalb Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, SBA, the Atlanta Business League, and the Greater Women's Business Council, along with GMSDC, will all be there, and all of our partners there to make sure that our constituents have everything they need around access to capital. And so, Alonzo, is there anything missing in this day? Because again, we want to make sure everybody has what they need. They've got that wonderful resource, that book, and that takeaway. So that's going to be the gold. And if you leave without your book, shame on you.
No, this really is a great slate of panelists. You've covered all of the issues. When I look at the financing life cycle, I view it from the following perspective. You begin looking at family and friends, as you mentioned in the very beginning of the segment. From there, you start looking at the angel investors, and typically that would go up to anywhere from $250,000 up to around $2 million. Once you pass that point, you start thinking
$2 million from family and friends.
You can get up to about $250,000 to about $2 million from angels.
Okay. I was going to say family and friends.
My apologies.
Okay.
And from there, you start looking at the venture capitalists.
Okay.
And at that point, you're starting to say, okay, now I've brought in a slate of investors, and now I have to figure out how to make sure that they get the return on investment that they're looking for. So you start looking at the investment banks. And of course, banks play a critical role in this from the beginning to the end. Now, the piece that I think many of us have the biggest struggle with is the issue of valuation. And we'll be talking about that. You know what?
I'm glad you brought that up. We've got a session, I think, that how to value your business. That is incredible, because many small businesses don't know how to do that valuation. And that's critical. And so the takeaways from that, I think we can do a whole segment on Let's Talk on just valuating your business, because most don't understand how you do that and what are the key components in how you actually do that piece of work.
Absolutely. Many people end up sort of harming themselves at the end of the day. They'll say, okay, I have an investor that wants to come in, I'm willing to sell X amount of the business, and not really think through the valuation of the business to discern whether that's a good sell or a bad sell. So this is a critical component. I'm glad to see it's going to be a part of the program.
And, I think another critical component that you're going to talk about as well in the session is the stages of the company and the different kinds of investment options for the stage of the company. Mm-hmm. That's critical, because people don't understand, based on where I'm at, what kind of resources do I need to be looking for, and where are those resources at? Mm-hmm. I think that's key as well. So the life cycle of the company and the resources that make sense in many cases for those life cycles, that's critical. So again, I'm excited about the 18th. Now we'll tell our listeners we only have room for 100 people. And so as I checked today, we are 60% of the way. And so if you have not registered online, you want to go to www.gmsdc.org and you want to register. We will have 100 people. And as you know, at the Federal Reserve, there's a little bit of security there. So you want to give yourself ample time to come at 8 o'clock for breakfast and be able to get in and get situated. You can't just roll up to the Federal Reserve and just roll right in. It just doesn't work that way, does it? No, it does not. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about some things you need to know if you're planning to come to the summit on February 18th. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
There are so many numbers in our lives. Numbers we try to make bigger. Numbers we try to keep small. Some we celebrate. Some we work toward. At Wells Fargo, we're here, empowering communities, offering wealth-building tools and helping you make the most of your numbers, while making sure you never feel like one. Wells Fargo and you, together we'll go far.
Here's another reason to love a sunny day. More renewable energy. That's because Georgia Power is helping grow solar energy, making Georgia a national leader. And when the clouds roll in, our diverse fuel mix of nuclear, coal, natural gas, and hydro allows us to choose the most cost-efficient energy source available, saving money for our customers and keeping power flowing 24/7. Learn more about the bright future of energy at georgiapower.com/solar.
And we're back with Alonzo Lawrence and Dara Butler of the Federal Reserve. And so as we're thinking about for those folks that are going to be coming on February 18th, what are some things that they need to be prepared for to come? You don't just show up, with access to capital with not some information, doing a little homework before you come. So, Alonzo, what should they prepare for? What should you come armed with if you're going to do a one-on-one? Because you can do a one-on-one with Dun & Bradstreet. You can do a one-on-one with Rodney Sampson to talk about angel investing. And so, how do they prepare?
Great question. Just like at this conference, you never know who you'll run into. But the great thing about this conference is you know who you'll run into. So you want to be prepared on a few fronts. First, as a threshold matter, you always want to make sure that you've got your financial house in order in terms of having at least some summary financials in place that you can reference or hand out to the appropriate person if it's inquired about. Second, I'll tell you, whenever I have a client that is looking for capital, and I speak with my financial partners, people that I refer business to in terms of potential opportunities, potential investments, the first question they ask me is about management. So make sure that you have a management team either in place or ready to become part of the company once you start moving forward, depending upon your stage of development. The last thing I'll emphasize is a real basic point, but one that can be critical long term, and that is the type of entity that you have formed. There are three primary types of entities. One is a C corporation, the other is an S corporation, and the other is an LLC. We typically end up going between either an LLC or a C corporation. Some people use an S corporation. So why is this important? A good example is if you are an S corporation, but you're seeking to raise capital. If you're looking at sophisticated investors, they will typically want preferred stock if you're looking at it from an equity perspective. The problem is if you have an S corporation, you can only have one class of stock and maintain your S corp status. So if you know that you want to raise capital and you're an S corp, you have to sort of revisit that issue, or from the very beginning, not go the S corp route, look at an LLC or a C corporation, because that's better suited for what you're looking at long term.
Excellent information. I think anybody who's planning to come, again, Alonzo's tips are you want to come prepared. Again, you never know who's in the room, or you do know who's in the room. And we have an opportunity for you to schedule one-on-one sessions to talk specifically about your business with someone and to help you grow. So again, you don't want to miss this opportunity, February 18th from 8 to 2 at the Federal Reserve in Midtown Atlanta. It's a fun-filled, packed day of information, resources, all designed to help small businesses grow. And so again, I want to thank you, Dara Butler and Alonzo Lawrence, for joining us. Both of you will be there. I think it will be an exciting day for everyone as part of the Financial Summit 2016. And so to our listeners, I want to thank you for this edition of Let's Talk Small Business. Our sponsors, without you, this would not be possible. Wells Fargo, the Coca-Cola Company, and Georgia Power. Thank you for all you do. We'll see you on the next edition of Let's Talk Small Business.
Every marching band play my song, and every choir